Welcome to our Women in Science webinar. I'm Magali Haas, the CEO and founder of Cohen Bioscience. We are a New York City-based nonprofit biomedical and technology research organization, and we're dedicated to advancing brain health through the power of data science. In 2015, United Nations General Assembly declared February 11th as the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. I am joined today by several of my colleagues at Cohen Veterans Bioscience, all of who are pursuing STEM careers. STEM refers to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So going around the table, can you each please share your name, title, and highest degree you pursued in education, starting with Allison?
Hi, I'm Allison Gage, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer at CVB, and I am a PhD neuroscientist.
Marianne?
Hi, I'm Marianne Zirkle. I'm the Executive Director of the Brain Commons, and I have a medical degree.
Kirsten?
Hi, I'm Kirsten Small. I have a PhD with a broad-based background from molecular biology to physiology and pharmacology. And Deputy Director, sorry.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chantel Ferlin Beckham. I'm the Senior Director of External Affairs, and I have a PhD in neuroscience.
Jana?
Hi, I'm Jana Rosenberg. I'm the Director of the Early Signal Digital Health Program, and I have the equivalent of a master's degree in statistics and econometrics.
Nicole?
Hi, I'm Nicole Bjorklund. I'm the director in our Translational Research and Development Group. I have a PhD in biochemistry.
Isabel?
Hi, I'm Isabel Curro. I'm Senior Manager in the Technology Development Department. I have a Bachelor's of Science in Biomedical Engineering, and I'm currently pursuing a Master's in Public Health.
And Elena?
Hi, I'm Elena Rotundo. I'm a program manager with the Translational Research and Development team, and I have a PhD in neuroscience.
Thank you, everybody. So according to the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, 30% of the world's researchers are women. So I'm just going to start with an open-ended question. Does that statistic surprise you, and how is it relevant? Does anybody want to take a turn on that question?
I can start. So I don't think, unfortunately, that the statistic is surprising. It's low, but I think it's what we see in many technical areas in the world. And I think it's important because it informs the questions that are asked in science and also how we address them. So it impacts the results that we actually get to.
Does anyone want to add to that?
I'm happy to add to that. I think that those statistics are starting to change. I think as some of us came up through the sciences, there was less representation to model after. But I think now you're seeing, large influx of women who are really getting excited about being in the STEM fields, and it's becoming more mainstream. And I think those statistics are heading in the right direction.
I would also throw in, coming from a statistics standpoint, I focus on the detail, which is that this is an international number. And so I'd probably want to break that down into developing countries versus the developed countries. And I wonder whether or not in developed countries, the picture seems a lot more optimistic and relative to perhaps developing countries. And that would be kind of very useful to know in terms of the question of where to put funding and where's the gap actually located. And perhaps the picture is actually improving quite a lot when compared to, let's say, 30 years ago. So I would kind of want to flesh out what that number actually means.
Yeah, in fact, women have achieved parity in the numbers in life sciences in many countries and even dominate in that particular field. But you're absolutely correct. When the report comes out, it's got breakdown by geography and also specific areas of focus. And where we are still seeing women remaining a minority is in the digital information technology space, computing, physics, mathematics, and engineering. So and as we know, these are the fields that are driving the revolution, technology revolution of tomorrow. So, and where many of the jobs will be. So that is an important and critical disparity. So actually then, Marianne and Isabel, since you're both in that technology space as well as Jana, what do you think can foster more engagement by women in these fields?
Yeah, from my standpoint, Magali, I think of myself as an informatician or informaticist, which is actually a new field in the last, just over a decade, where we started using that term. I think one of the things that's important, or a way we could foster this, is to actually educate folks a little bit more about the new roles that you can play. I am often the only female at a table of folks that share that title, and I have been for a while. And there are, I think, definitely more opportunities to understand technology that don't come from a strict sort of information science space now, which is how I got into that space. So I think it's just getting kind of a better understanding of what's available out there for folks at this point in time, and the changing roles and the changing names and how we're categorizing these jobs, and what you can and can't do. I had no idea, I hadn't heard of it. It sort of developed as I migrated into the research space. And so for me, that's been a turning point, and one that helped me kind of get more in this field and be more involved.
And Isabel?
Yeah, adding off, I think that's a great point, Marianne. And I think starting young is also very important. Like, I was very lucky that my father is an engineer, so I actually understood what the field of engineering was from a very young age. And I always loved math and science. And I was just lucky that I had mentors in a way to kind of push me in that direction. And I think having female mentors especially is very important for women in STEM and in fields like engineering, where there's less women in general in those areas.
And actually, by show of hands, how many of you had that kind of mentorship that Isabel is referring to, and was it critical in your pursuit of science and technology? So maybe first, by show of hands, how many of you had someone who really mentored you or helped push you in that direction? Okay, that's interesting in and of itself. And for those, maybe Kirsten, you can tell us a little bit about why that mentorship was important.
I would say my most significant mentorship, other than grad school, the classic types of mentors actually came a little bit later in my career. I was working in the pharmaceutical industry in a scientific role. I was even considering leaving the scientific role because I wasn't, I was kind of miserable in my job. And so when you're usually miserable in your job, you're looking elsewhere. And there was one individual who kind of thought I was actually a good fit for science. And I feel like that I am a good fit for science, and really worked with me, mentored me where I was at the time, and positioned me to, move forward in a way that was aligned with my interests and my natural skills. So it was really a mid-career type of mentorship that kick-started my progression. I think I was a slow starter.
Isabel mentioned that having women mentors is important. But does anyone have any other opinions? Does it matter what the gender of the mentor is specifically?
I'm happy to take that question. I don't think I had mentors growing up. I'm a first generation college graduate. I think I had parents that were like, go for it, but didn't really have firsthand experience. I was lucky along the way, I think, to have teachers that really just took an interest in letting me be creative in what I did. So I, similar to Kirsten, didn't have great mentors until later on, until graduate school. But I think when I was in graduate school and I was pursuing STEM, it was very helpful that my PI, my mentor, was a female. and really was navigating the challenges of being a female in a STEM field, everything from having children to really just speaking up at the table when you're surrounded by mostly men. So I think that was helpful, and most of my mentors since then have all been female. And I think it's really helpful to have people that really understand those dynamics.
So it's interesting question also. Everyone said that it's helped you along the way. Have you ever encountered a situation where, in fact, someone was discouraging of you going into this field and said, yeah, you shouldn't even bother because you're a woman? Nicole, I see you nodding.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I did have a bad experience when I was in my first postdoc. I was with my second son. I was going to have him, in a number of months, but I was preparing to publish a manuscript on the work I had been doing, and my PI boss, he actually pointed at my stomach and said that I wouldn't be publishing and that I could just forget that. So I left that lab, but I mean, that was the most blatant thing that ever happened, just pointing at my pregnant stomach. But luckily I didn't believe him. And I was able to find new and definitely more encouraging mentors.
That's great that you carried forward. Does anyone else want to share a story?
Yeah, I mean, I have a similar story of applying for a job and was pregnant at the time and was very blatantly told, like, this isn't probably going to work for you because of the fact that, you're about to have kids and you won't be able to kind of compete at the same level that a man would be able to in the position, because I would have divided time.
Well, I'll share a story from, I was pursuing my bachelor's of engineering degree, and we had an instructor who at the time of the final, if you were right at that edge of between grades, you could choose whether to take the final or not. And there were 4 of us who were at that edge of an A plus, A minus, B plus kind of edge. 4 of us went in to receive our recommendations from the advisor. 2 of us were women, 2 of us were men. The men had lower average scores than the women did, but they were advised to go for it, and we were advised not to go for it. The interesting thing was that we all consulted each other afterwards on, and that's why we know. And the 2 women went and did the test, and we both got A pluses. The 2 guys didn't go into the test, so they landed where they landed, which I think is a testimony to, you have to believe in yourself, and you have to pursue your own dreams. So now I'd like to turn to the question of why you've gone out. We are a brain research organization, and many of you have pursued brain research as a career. What led you down this particular path? Why brain research? And maybe I'll start with Allison there.
So I never thought about brain research until I got into my first neuroscience class in college. And I would say from that point, there was no turning back. I was absolutely fascinated by the concept that you could have these individual cells that could actually result in somebody learning something, that you could actually find at a cellular level an example of what it means to actually take in information from your environment, process it, and learn something, and then eventually actually turn that into a memory. And that's sort of a very simple way of explaining it, but that concept is what drove me from there. And I found a lab at graduate school that was working on learning and memory and trying to understand that biological basis of learning, and just went from there. And I stayed in the pharmaceutical industry, always in CNS, in conditions related to brain disorders, and obviously then moved to CVB with the same interest.
And Elena, you are also a neuroscientist. Can you share why?
Yeah, absolutely. So I come from a background where both of my parents were actually PhDs in psychology. So born and raised in the behavioral sciences, always loved it. But when I got to college and started taking biology classes, fell in love with it, fell in love with research, and it really only seemed natural to pursue a career in neuroscience. The last thing I'll add is I also had an early opportunity to do a research internship in an inpatient psychiatric ward. And this was my kind of first face-to-face experience, really getting to know people and how they were affected by serious brain disorders. And it really made an impact and motivated me to join the field and do something about it.
And Isabel, you're an engineer, but you've landed in this brain space. Why? Why did you pursue this particular path?
Well, as an undergrad, I took a human neuroanatomy class for one of my electives. I was interested in the brain just because it seemed kind of like the next frontier. Like we don't know too much about it, and it seemed like a space where we could learn so much. And in that class, we had the option to go to a lecture, which was about the health impacts of mass incarceration. And one of the speakers there actually spoke about the huge mental health impacts that come from these social and structural situations that we have in our society. And I just thought that going into the mental health space and the brain health space seemed like a very important place where I could have a lot of impact coming from an engineering background and from just a background where I wanted to just help people in the way that I saw most fit. So that's what kind of led me towards brain health and mental health in general.
And it's interesting that you spoke about a mission, a purpose, and we're a nonprofit research institution, and this isn't really the usual path, right, for master doctoral level scientists to go. So maybe Kirsten, starting with you, what led you to enter into this nonprofit research institution?
Okay, so prior to coming to CVB, I was working in the pharmaceutical industry at a couple of different companies. You know, in both academic and pharmaceutical research, you know, there's a lot of emphasis to be successful and to advance the project, your career. And I was very attracted to the emphasis on the scientific rigor at CVB. And the mission statement, because my overall mission statement is also to like help human health. And so moving to a nonprofit that was really emphasized on the scientific rigor and the design and the approach to asking the questions and testing the questions and building the platforms to understand the basis of the foundations of the disease was really attractive to me at the time.
Thanks. And Marianne, you've come from the government side into this nonprofit sector. What are your observations?
So there are some similarities and differences. I think that you know, CVB itself, I think, is a unique nonprofit from what I've even known of or heard of. And so we were a small group that I think I'm amazed, having been in this organization for 2 years, the amount that we get done with not as many resources as other groups out there that aren't nonprofit have. I think, you know, leaps and bounds beyond some of the things that I've actually seen in other organizations happening in 3 to 5 years. That's something that is really important to me. The other thing I noticed when I came on board was that you could truly see in every one of our staff members this alignment with the mission, and that it was really a mission-driven desire to be a part of something. And you don't often see that. I mean, with larger organizations, you just don't really have the ability to interact with everyone. But in general, but I think, yeah, these are the types of things that I gravitated towards. So you're not just one person, many. You can see, you feel the impact as a team. which again is very different. So those are all things that just align with my inner mission, as Kristen said, and made me, really want to be a part of an organization like this.
So I think everyone's articulated that they're invested in the science because they want to make a difference in the world. And so maybe starting with Jana, what difference do you think you're going to have in doing the science that you do? Where do you see your impact, and where do you see the field going in the next 5 years or so?
Well, that's a pretty weighty statement, but hopefully as kind of representation of CVB's mission, which I'll go backwards before going forwards with this, and actually answer the previous question regarding CVB's mission, and highlight the fact that what really makes us unique as a research organization, as a nonprofit, is specifically around going towards the areas, being very application driven, and as a result, very much focusing strategically on filling the gaps with the highest point of leverage. And as a result of that, this focus on getting the highest point of leverage, CVB has this particular consistent thoroughness about actually spanning all of science in general and developing an ecosystem of collaboration. So the sense of collaboration is both very important internally for us as a company in terms of working together, but also I would say externally in terms of the scientific community. And so what I would say is, ideally in 5 years, what I would hope that we would promote is a greater sense of collaboration across the scientific space in general. So that would be the greatest source of impact that I think that we can have. And then in terms of the specific set of work, which I'm focusing on, which is digital health, I really hope that we will be able to fully facilitate the creation of a decentralized clinical trial platform by which we can kind of distribute wearables, and then we can have greater sense of a person's health status, both in a preventative sense before they get sick, and then also when they do get sick, to be able to monitor that, and then as a result, be able to provide care for those that otherwise don't have it, or otherwise they would be late to have it. And that's just some of the thoughts that I'm excited for.
Thank you. And that would be very exciting. So thank you. And Chantal, you're coming in with now a policy focus. Can you speak a little bit about what that means and why there's a science part of that, and what the impact you see in 5 years would look like?
Sure. I think part of my draw to CVB was the fact that I could sit at the intersection of the patient experience, the scientific knowledge, as well as kind of how that impacts the greater society and sits within that space. I'm uniquely positioned often when I'm in the room. I'm one of the only scientists that actually sort of thinks about it from all of these different directions, and tries to convince the greater public and the political arena that this is something that we really need to focus on, and why, from every angle. So I think the biggest impact that CVB can have is that we come to this space of veterans mental health from a very unique position of looking at it from specifically the research side of things, and why that has failed to make progress for those that it matters. And we're have been able to make a really big impact in just a very short time by really getting people on board to why this mission is important and why this research stream is important. And in the next 5 to 10 years, I'm excited to see what kind of impact that we can have, not just by showcasing and highlighting the different research programs that are happening at CVB, but really how that impacts into the patient populations that we're hoping to really make the biggest impact on.
Thank you. And Nicole, you're working on biomarkers and at that intersection of translational research. Can you speak a little bit to what are biomarkers and why is that important? Why do you think that's going to have an impact?
So biomarkers are essential for the drug development process. They're something that can be used to measure how your body is functioning. And it's really helpful to help in terms of, like I mentioned, the drug development process, but also in the clinic. What is really the key aspect of these is that they are objective. It's something that we can measure, and it's something that, you know, you don't have to be having a really good day to get a good biomarker, or you don't have to have had a good night's sleep, unless you're measuring your sleep specifically. But they can be used for so many things. And it's something that, you know, it's difficult in brain health to get useful biomarkers, and it's something that is a very exciting field right now, and we're seeing a lot of progress. It's been the improvement of the technology, but also in our data analytics, that we're able to now capture these more, you know, granular details that are helpful in understanding what is going on biologically in each person. So by utilizing all of this progress, we're very hopeful that we'll be able to develop these biomarkers for PTSD and other neuropsychiatric conditions.
Exactly. And you've mentioned a lot of data, and the digital teams talked about data and so on. So I'm going to bring it back to you, Marianne. What are we going to do with all this data? And how do you think your program efforts are going to contribute in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so Brain Commons, which you can think of as the sort of data sharing and discovery platform, is where we want to pull all of this information in some way, whether it be pooled or in an interoperable fashion, that we get access to this information to those who know how to use it best. And depending on what your use case is, that could be data scientists, researchers, citizen scientists. It all depends on the question you're asking. But what we would like to do is create this sort of hotbed of information where you can then answer all of these questions. And it's a combination of decades of information that has been pulled on all of these related diseases, and sort of look across the brain and try to understand these issues, not just treating a symptom, but actually figuring out what is the underlying cause. What do we know now that we didn't know 10 years ago, because we have been constantly bringing in data, whether it's real world data or data collected from clinical trials. So it's very exciting to me to think that we can finally bring technology, information, expertise all together and be able to understand and discover from all of this.
Wonderful. And so to wrap it up and maybe bring it full circle, I'm going to ask Allison. You and I did our doctoral training during the decade of the brain. And at the time, you know, we were all going to solve everything back in the 90s. Yeah. So where have we come from those days, Allison? And how do you see the future for brain research?
So I think the decade of the brain was actually good for spurring a lot of work and interest. And I think we've come very far in understanding how we need to improve science in this area, and try to get to really understanding a lot of these conditions that we call disorders, like post-traumatic stress disorder or major depressive disorder, anxiety disorders, and really start to understand them from a biological level and be able to put them in the category of a brain disease, like everything else that we think of, like Alzheimer's or epilepsy. And hopefully what we're getting towards is actually what Nicole and everybody was just mentioning. When you go in as a patient to your doctor's office and describe your symptoms of fatigue or migraine or not being able to sleep, that instead of providing a medication that's based basically on what I've just said, that they can actually give me a test, whether they take a blood sample or a saliva test, and look for some of these biomarkers, and then actually say, well, you know what, you actually would be better off if you took medication A or treatment A over B, based on the type of objective biomarkers that we can measure. And actually I can improve then with much more success than the kind of randomly trying these medications one after the other.
Thank you so much. So I think it's wonderful to work with all of you. It's an incredible team, and I know we're only half the team, but it's really important to show the world how women are contributing to this field, and the field has a wonderful future, and we're hoping others will join us. So I want to thank you all for participating in this webinar session, and keep up the great work.